to discussion. I spoke with Chip Tuttle, he's the Chief Operating Officer of Suffolk Downs. I gave him a call today to just get a brief overview from him on what their proposal is for the fairgrounds. There are two bills pending currently, Senate Bill 101 and House Bill 13. Both copies were included in your packets. So Suffolk Downs at the moment is proposing a relocation of its horse racing operations to the former Great Barrington Fairgrounds site. They're expecting a fall of 2020 soft opening. His expectation was that 24 to 30 days per year max would be what they would use for live racing down there. They're looking to secure at this time a long-term lease of at least 10 years. The total investment that they expect is somewhere between $15 and $20 million into the track, the grandstands, and the property in general. The season they're proposing is September and October, which is somewhat of an off-season for us after the summer season and just at the early phases of fall foliage. The track is currently a half mile. I did ask him about expansion, and he did indicate that they expect to expand that track to about 3/4 of a mile. It requires, according to our town planner, Chris, somewhere between 2 and 3 special permits, one for commercial amusement, one for floodplain protection, and possibly a third for water quality protection. And just to answer the taxation question, that was something I did run by Sean, that right now that property is primarily nonprofit, so they're not paying any taxes except for the solar field that is in the northern corner. Assuming this project does go through, a for-profit entity on that property would begin paying taxes on the portion that is used for that use. So, and Sean is here if you have any questions to ask him about that.
Comments? Lee?
I'd just like to speak to why I asked this to be put this on the agenda, and with that I'd like permission from the chair to read something.
What is it you'd like to read?
And some of this gives a bit of backstory about what's happened. In May 2019, Sterling Suffolk Racecourse announced plans to open a commercial horse racing track at the Great Barrington Fairgrounds. This follows the renewal of their lease at the fairgrounds last fall. In order to make this happen, Sterling Suffolk needs the legislature to pass a new bill, S-101, which seeks specific changes to racing and gaming laws, which includes the repealing of the requirement of a public referendum. This new bill is now moving through the legislature. 3 weeks ago, on July 1st, a public hearing on S-101 took place at the Joint Committee on Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure at the State House, in which representatives from Suffolk Downs attended, but not anyone from the town of Great Barrington. This absence was due to the town not being notified. Attendance at this public hearing was crucial, for it would have provided Great Barrington an opportunity to gather additional information, ask legislators and Suffolk Downs questions, provide feedback on the proposed bill, and hear grievances from other groups who attended. Because the town of Great Barrington was not represented at this public hearing, the bill is now free to progress towards its passage into law with no input from Great Barrington residents. Under existing Massachusetts law, Chapter 128A, Section 14, a public forum followed by a public referendum would need to occur. Under the Senate Bill 101, this chapter would be repealed, and a public forum and public referendum would not be required. Instead, a simple majority vote by the Select Board would enable the commercial racetrack to move forward. My goal of bringing this to the board's attention is to inform Great Barrington residents on the progression of this bill and to make a motion for the Select Board to send a request to the Joint Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure Committee to hold Senate Bill 101 in committee. This would allow the town to perform further due diligence on the bill's impact on the community, hold a public forum for residents, and have a hand in the crafting of the legislation. What's important to note is that we're not talking about the revival of the agricultural fair that includes horse racing for 10 days a year. We're talking about a commercial horse racing operation moving into town with a legal right to run races up to 40 days a year. I believe the town of Great Barrington needs to have, number one, an open discussion and a town vote on whether this is something we want in our community. Number two, a hand in crafting the legislation. This bill should have come to the select board and the residents months ago before starting through the legislative process. We should have known what was being proposed. We should have been notified of the public hearing. The residents of Great Barrington deserve to have open and transparent forums on this subject. Number three, studies. Before legislation was written, environmental impact, economic feasibility, and traffic studies should have been provided by Suffolk Sterling. Once any big operation gets a foot in the door, it opens the town up to the possibility that they'll do what they want, pay the fines, and keep the town tied up in legal fees. The time to effect change is now, before it is signed into law. It was only after doing extensive research on my own that I realized the impact that this bill would have on Great Barrington residents. For this reason, I'd like to make a motion following discussion. I move that an email accompanied by a letter from the town of Great Barrington be sent to both chairs of the Joint Committee on Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure before the close of business on July 24th, 2019, requesting that Bill S-101 be held in committee and not move forward until the town has conducted an open forum inviting all interested parties. A notice of this meeting must be published in the local newspapers no less than 7 days prior to the forum.
Do I have a second? Mark, do you want to respond to any of this?
I think what I would suggest, after talking to Chip today, is that we invite him in here to talk to the board and get some of these questions answered. I think he has a lot of information. I realize he's representing Suffolk Downs, but he has a lot of information. He was able to answer all of my questions today, and I suspect he could probably answer yours as well. So.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to take action on something that, I read the bill, which we got a few days ago, but otherwise I know nothing about this, the consequences of delay, that would be great.
So I would ask, with the board's permission.
Public discussion?
Yeah, we will. I would ask, you need to go to the microphone, so when I'm ready. Two things is that the town manager be in contact with both Senator Hines and Representative Pignatelli, and to also invite Suffolk Downs in for a discussion. Diego, go ahead.
Diego Gutierrez, resident of Housatonic. It's pretty interesting that we're talking about a major industry, a major economic impact on this town is going to be kind of breezed through, and we're talking about inviting kind of like the wolf into the chicken house, and not invite the towns to have input, the town citizens to have input on this major thing that's going to may happen in this town. I think that
Diego, let me just interrupt for a
Yeah.
second. It requires 2, if not 3 special permits.
I realize
And the
that.
town citizens will have input.
I realize that, but I think what's shocking in this what Lee said is that this is not going to this bill will bypass the ability of the town to have a referendum, a town vote on this, and we're talking about something that's going to have a much bigger impact than the marijuana legalization here. Which we're complaining about a line of 50 people every day, or a few parking spots being taken in the shopping center. We're talking about a major thing of 40 races a year in a compact time period. What is the impact of that, and what is the impact of this is a gambling and entertainment entity. This is not someone coming in here saying, oh, we're going to have this quaint little horse races once in a while. We're talking about a vested interest that I looked up this company. This company has already been fined over almost $5 million in environmental fines for what they were doing in Boston. They also lost their bid for a casino and lost $100 million, and that was like, okay, let's move on to the next thing. So we're talking about an entity that I'm, it raises my concerns to bring someone like that into this town, and the impact that kind of activity is gonna have in this town. So to allow this to happen in town without a town referendum, I think is a big mistake compared to, look what, marijuana shops have to go through. And that went through a town referendum. So I really am amazed that this got through without hardly any notice in the public. That this major industry is trying to get a foothold on here with the impact that it's gonna have, and I'm not talking about horse racing, I'm talking about the type of entity and what their real vested interest may be in this town, which is to get a foothold, to be able to continue with their gambling and off-site betting and entertainment business, which they got kicked out of Boston. They're trying to get a full foothold in this town. So I really think that this needs to be halted, take a pause, let the town, invite the town. Why are we inviting Chip here? Let's invite the town, publicly about what their feelings are about this company with some due diligence.
No one's not saying we're not going to do that, we just need
Yeah, but it's
we
already-
need to get more information.
This is days ahead of this being able to get through in the state legislature.
And-
And then it's a done deal.
And we haven't verified that we are giving up, that they're asking us to give up our rights in this.
Yeah, well, I think this is a very concerning, very disturbing kind of development.
Brandy?
Hi, Brandy Nelson, 28 Barrington Place. I just want to be clear, I am here representing myself and also as a consultant. We are working for Sterling Suffolk. My firm has been hired, and if this comes before the planning board, I will of course be recusing myself. But I'd like to just let you know what we're doing is due diligence at this time. Our client understands that they need to engage with the town, and I believe they've had several meetings. I haven't been participating in those, but they have met with the town, and I believe that both the reporters here have put stories in the newspaper. As far as the comment about being kicked out of Boston, the Boston real estate market is extremely high right now, and Suffolk Downs was built in 1935 and took up a large area of Boston real estate. Racing just didn't sustain that anymore, so just to be clear about that. Also, I read through the legislation myself, and I don't see anything in that legislation that calls out Great Barrington at all. We've been hired, in fact, because they're anticipating 3 special permits, as well as infrastructure improvements to the grandstand, and other improvements that just can't be made with the nonprofit group that owns the property now. So everything they've expressed to me is that they want to work cooperatively with the town, and I'm sure Chip would be more than happy to come and meet with the town. And outside of that, as an individual, I encourage you to contact our legislators, because of course we should have a word in the process. So, thank you.
Thanks, Brandy.
Yeah, Steve Farina.
Yep.
I agree that the process should be reviewed publicly, and I think that I would love to hear somebody second this motion and see you guys vote affirmatively to write a letter to hold this in committee. It will do nothing to, it would allow time if this can be held in committee, and at some point in the future, after you guys have had a chance, the town's had a chance to talk to Suffolk Downs, we think that it's a good thing to allow this to go forward, then you can ask them to release it, bring it to the floor, whatever. Silencing the vote, I'm afraid of what's going to happen if they come in. If this thing passes and they come in with a plan like this CDC picture that we had here, that was driving me nuts seeing the affordable housing next to the sewage treatment plant, when this thing could have been shot down so many times and told, go back and rework it. They come in and say, we met the technical specifications of what we need to do, and you need to approve it because of that. If this gets to that point, they're going to come in and say, we met the technical specifications. It's not really up to you to decide whether you want it in your town or not. You have to take it. So I think that just writing a letter, I think what the motion was just write a letter to ask the legislature to hold it in committee, and don't bring it to the floor for a vote until the town of Great Barrington has had a say in the process. And I think that's a prudent thing to do, and I would encourage you to second that and vote affirmatively.
I think to your, one of the special permits that they will need is an entertainment special permit. So not just meeting specifications, but an ability for us as a select board to look at whether it does fit our community or not. That is a little different than just water overlay. I believe that the motion that you made was a little bit more than just a letter. It had a public forum in place, which I don't think I'm against necessarily, but if it is a motion to just write a letter and say that we would like them to hold it, just like you can write letters, just like everybody else can write a letter, and then that's something I'm in support of. I think we should be writing a letter and saying we are maybe not ready, you know, but it is one of those things where it is not, it isn't necessarily the responsibility of the state, of the House and the Senate to keep a town that may or may not be involved with something down the road informed of what's happening. And so it depends on how, I don't think that it's, you know, it feels as though we're being taken aback by this, that it's in this process, that it's where it is already in this process. But I don't know how we could have been more informed. Like, it isn't something that the Senate typically does.
Right, but given the opportunity, now you have the opportunity to stop it in its tracks for at
Potentially,
least
we
for.
don't know, we don't know.
Right, potentially, just to put input in to say, hey, you know what, we got caught off guard. We'd like to, if you would do us a favor, let us have a little bit of time to look back over this thing and see where this goes and what the implication is to our town, because the fact is, this is the place they're looking at. And I'm not saying I'm against having horse racing here, I just think that it's prudent to allow more opportunity for public input.
So Steve, it's interesting that you and I actually agreed on Lake Mansfield Road, and one of your concerns was that we were pressured into voting after 10 years of research. And tonight, this has been brought up for the first time, and you were kind of pressuring us into voting when, what would it hurt for the town manager to do some more research on this and come back to us?
And I see what you're saying there,
Yeah.
however, the difference is, this is coming up and could potentially be coming up in a matter of days, where the Lake Mansfield decision could wait, because regardless of what that decision is, that's not going to happen for a year or two. And so this is just a matter of saying, let's step back, and I'm not saying don't do it, and I'm not saying that ultimately Lake Mansfield Road closing is something that doesn't get done. I think that we need to have more public input as far as the recommendation that was made. Well, that's not true. I don't think Lake Mansfield Road should be closed. But however, my point is, I think that I think we're talking about a tight window, and I think Lee's trying to jump back in.
Could I
Sure.
answer that? So really what I see is, this is, you know, time is of the essence here. You know, this was written in January, I think it was January 22nd, 2019. It's been moving through the process up until July 1st, where it had a public hearing. So supposedly there's been meetings happening between the towns. I would be curious to see, you know, who was at these meetings and what was discussed. You know, did anyone see a proposal? Then this hearing took place on July 1st. Why were we not aware of it, or who did know about it? Because this was the opportunity, because it was a public hearing, because it went through this joint committee, for us to be at the table for a piece of legislation that was written specifically for Great Barrington. It doesn't say Great Barrington, but because there's no place else for Suffolk Downs to go, it is Great Barrington. So time is of the essence. The end of the legislative session is July 31st. This already has gone through this joint commission, or the joint committee. And because we were not there to represent it and say yes or no or ask questions, it can move through to be adopted as a law. You know, this bill can move through for passage into a law. So this is actually very, very timely and very necessary for us to act on it, even if I would say, you know, if it takes just taking off the public referendum, just saying, let's pause this, hold it in committee till we can have more information, because, you know, it looks like no one has read this bill except me.
We've all.
We have all read
Okay, so I'm wondering,
So
well,
section
where?
12, section 12 of this bill specifically
Yeah.
maintains our right to weigh in on this. And so
Yes,
so they
after.
can't happen unless we say it can happen.
Yes, but I'm
That's
saying,
protection of
if,
the bill. We don't know the consequences of delay. We have no idea what that means if we get them, if we do talk them into delaying this, we don't know what that means. We don't know the ultimate, we don't know the ultimate economic impact of horse racing, and we don't know the ultimate detriments of horse racing, nor should we weigh in on it, because ultimately, we have to sit as judge when they come to us for a special permit, so we can't
so
do
why did
prejudice
we
to
wait
ourselves.
from January to now for me to bring this up on the agenda, for us to know that this was happening, that this was passing through the legislator? I mean, why does it take someone saying, hey, we just had a public hearing that no one knew about, that we could have gone to Boston? People from East Boston went to this hearing and complained about Suffolk Downs and said, we are sick of you. I mean, you know, I have a item from the Mass, the state news talking about this hearing. Why weren't we there? Did you know about the hearing?
We knew about the bill, we knew the bill was coming up, we didn't know when, it's just months ago.
May I ask, has the budget passed, has the state passed the budget? Does anybody know the answer to that?
No.
No, it has not.
Is this, when you talked to Chip, did we find out whether this is tied to the budget or not?
No, it isn't.
I
It wasn't
would-
at least the last
I
time.
mean, I would say that they have to pass a budget by July 31st. I mean, they can't leave session without passing a budget in the state of Massachusetts. I mean, the governor has a provisional budget. This can come back. I mean, there's other bills that I've asked about that they say they can take 2 years. We know that they're trying to move this one along because of the parties invested in it, because of the money that is involved with it. But I don't, as much as I think that time is an important thing on this, I think we have a lot more things on the plate in Great Barrington that we don't need to drop everything to make this a priority when we know that the state is just trying to get a budget passed. That I don't think that the legislators are going to say, let's let Massachusetts go without a budget and put this ahead of it. That seems ludicrous to me.
The one part that's concerning that you brought up, and I've yet to verify, is that we would lose local control. The reason we have a town manager is to ask the town manager to come back to us, and if need be, at a special meeting, if in fact that's correct, although it's not in the bill anywhere that I see it, then we could invite Senator Pignatelli, Representative Pignatelli and Senator Hines to our meeting and discuss it.
But seeing that this has already gone past the public hearing and we know it's going towards being made into a law,
But
why are
there's,
we not holding? Why can't we just at least say, you know, hold it in committee till we get some more
if we have,
information?
if the
What's
citizens of
what's
the town have final control, why do we wanna hold them?
But that's what I'm saying, I'm comparing Mass General Law 128, and it says on the top of 101, it says repeal. The first thing it says is repeal, chapter 128 of the general laws is hereby repealed. Then I went to Mass General Law 128, and I said, oh, what's being repealed? All these sections are here. Oh, notice on section 14, granting of license, petition and ballots. Then I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? And then it talks about how it was supposed to go for a public referendum, and it has the actual vote, you know, what would be on that ballot, and that's being repealed. So we would have had a vote, we would have had a public referendum, but they're repealing chapter 128A, section 14, because they're repealing the entire chapter. So then, what's in its place? Well, let's go through, you know, 32 pages.
Lee, I got it.
But I'm just saying, it's actually very, very timely, and I'm not just, you know, bringing it up just to say, let's wait a couple weeks and then risk that it could go through the legislator, because, you know, and then pass, and then what could happen? Then they have all sorts of rights, and then, yes, they're gonna go through the local permits, and they're gonna go through that, but what Steve said, you know, then they say yes, 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 but once they're in there, you know, what do we do? You know, what authority do we have?
So are you implying that the local permitting process is just a yes?
No, but I'm
process?
saying, no, I'm saying that they're gonna abide by those local permits, you know, so they'll work with the conservation. But once they get a foothold in it, that's much
They
different.
have to go through us, not just conservation.
But
They
I'm
have to go
saying
through us.
that
We get
if
to say
this
that-
didn't change, the public would have had a referendum, very much like the marijuana law. They would have been able to have a public forum, they would have had a referendum. That's very different from the 5 of us making a decision for the town.
I'm not sure you're correct on that, so for you to
Well-
say that without,
Well, then let's pause it, so I could be completely wrong, because I've asked for the town council.
What are the
to look
consequences
for-
of pausing it? You don't know, we don't know, no one knows. We don't shoot from the hip here.
The consequences, can I speak?
Go to the microphone, state your name.
Nan Weil, and I'm at Great Barrington. I think the consequences of not pausing it are really very severe because it's like giving tacit approval. And once that's done, you have a foothold and you have a little bit more traction to move forward in the process. All the permits that you people will give, our people will give, who we voted for. But I think we need to have a little bit more reverence for the input of the public on that. And I totally agree. I think it should be postponed and it should be put on hold, so that the public can fairly weigh in on it. That's all.
Richard Ruth, Pearl Street. You know, it kind of smells that they never really came to us and said, this is going on. And
So
it's-
let me just clear, so everyone understands. Chip Total's been to town 3 or 4 times.
Who?
He's talked the CEO of Suffolk Downs. He's talked to the town manager, previous town manager, a number of times, met with members of the select board at that time a number of times. And Smitty has talked to us about it, not in the last 6 or 8 months, but we knew that this was coming. It's been in the newspapers, it was in the Boston Globe.
Well, I didn't know that we're gonna have a referendum, and that's what concerns me.
We're not.
Well, we should, isn't that part of the current legislation?
The current legislation says that a public referendum would be
Right,
required.
right.
The
We
new,
should be
this bill
insulted.
says it does not.
Taxpayers should be insulted, but we're not being
But
included in giving our.
We weren't, it's been in the paper, they've reached out to us. What they didn't do is call you at home. When we get this criticism all.
No.
Richard, please, we get this criticism all the time up here. People say, well, I didn't know you were doing that. What can we do? So they have a process. I'm not saying it's necessarily a mistake for us to intervene at this point. I just have no idea if it's a good idea. And I don't know that there's no downside to doing it.
Well, we should take some control of this.
That's what we're doing. We're gonna do some
Yes,
research,
we-
so we're not gonna just shoot from the hip and say, well, let's ask them to delay this. Well, we don't, first of all, we don't know if they can reopen a hearing. We have no idea. We can't. We don't know if they'll listen to us. We don't know we don't know anything. We risk looking silly and we risk.
Why don't we take control of the process
We can't- we
instead
don't
of waiting
control-
as
Okay,
they-
let's
if
not
they
get into
wanting a
discussion.
referendum?
So you get to speak one time on this.
I know, I'm counting how many people are in the room because everybody here is telling you that they want public input and you guys are fighting them. Well, a lot of people.
So let
I'm
me
just saying.
finish this discussion.
I'm sorry to say everybody, I didn't mean to speak for everybody.
In a 24 to 48 hour period, our town manager can speak to our elected representatives to clarify what this means. If in fact, some or all of Lee's concerns are correct, we can have a meeting in 48 hours posting, but we don't know that it's correct. And for us just to, Steve, you'd be the first one to admonish me if we did that, to vote on it without getting more clarification would also be wrong. If in fact that's correct, we'll come back before the 31st, but let's take a deep breath
Okay.
and.
Well, I like that answer, that's, I appreciate the very thoughtful answer of that, as opposed to, we're not doing this, because otherwise it would be weeks until the next
No.
select board meeting.
You know,
and maybe way
the select
back.
board,
So,
under
yeah,
the
I-
open meeting law, just has to give 48 hours notice. This is not an emergency. I'd never pretend it is. But if in fact Lee is correct, and I'm not doubting her, and I'm not saying she's right or wrong, because I respect her opinion, we can come back. Let's do some research. We have a town manager. That's why we have a town manager form of government, and let's look at this. Diego, have you spoken on this once already?
I only once.
Yeah, you only got
No,
one.
but I want to respond to a different issue.
No, it's still horse racing, and
It's not horse racing. You gotta give me 1 minute. I just want to ask, you guys said that Chip and his people were here talking to you guys several times, multiple times.
No, they were here actually, down there, and they were talking to the town manager.
Okay. And yet you did know that this crucial vote, you didn't get informed about this crucial vote.
So let
July
me
1st.
answer this, and then we're done with this, is that we knew that this bill was going through. That the contention that Lee is making, which I'm not doubting her, that we lose all local control was never discussed. All the bill that was going through would allow them to have horse racing in Great Barrington if it went through the local process.
So there's a big there's a big divide here, so that's what we just need to find out.
Well, I think somebody should have been there. I mean, I think that's kind
I'm
of.
not disagreeing with you.
You know, the fault, you know.
Steve, I just wanna clarify,
Yep.
we're not losing local control with this bill. It's just, throwing more obstacles in the way of a public referendum. So right now, it would, with, you know, anything as it stands now, it would just go to a public referendum. This Bill 101, it goes to the select board, and then if there's a petition, from what I read correctly, then it would go to petition, if there was a petition of, I think, 12% of the voters that disagreed with that, vote, then it would come to the select board again to, whether to take it, you know, to recommend that, to go by that petition, and then they would vote on it again. So basically what it's doing is it's setting up more obstacles for the public to directly have a vote in this.
So let me just
But
ask.
what I am saying is that, you know, I did bring this to, your attention and the town manager's attention last, I think, last week or the beginning of the week. I did ask for town council to take a look at this because you know, I'll be the first one to say that it's very, very confusing, and it took me a great deal of time to understand what all these repeals were, what the impact was. But I would just say that I would ask the board just to pause it, at least if we can say, let's pause it for 2 days, do our due diligence, you know, perform due diligence, and then meet back. Because what I'm worried is that if we don't, send a letter out, right now, the joint committee just is gonna go forward, and it could could become passage into law without us.
But you said it was till the 31st.
Well, I'm saying that it's moving through, so I'm just saying, unless we flag it and say, hey, listen, you know, we weren't at the joint hearing, we haven't really, you know, looked at the bill closely, we have some concerns, can you just wait for 2 days until we get back to you? You know, I'm just saying, can we at least pause it so that this joint committee realizes, hey, you know, we're paying attention now, and we're gonna have town council read this very closely, and then, you know, in a day, we're gonna come back. But I'm just saying, let's pause it. I don't see any problem with pausing that.
So I reached out to Beth Ann, who is Senator Hines, who is a co-signer on this bill, about kind of the process of a bill and where it goes through. And so every bill must go through the same review process to become a law. Get filed, go to committee, have a public hearing, then get a report from the committee. If it is reported favorably, it usually goes to a secondary committee for review. So this one is in review of a first committee, it's only had a hearing. Then it must be engrossed by both chambers and then enacted by both chambers and then go to the governor for final approval. It usually takes about a year. And so I think that I would like to make a motion that we find out what this change in this, whether we have a referendum, this kind of question of whether we have a referendum. So to look into that. If it comes back that we no longer are able to have this referendum, this town vote on this, that we write a letter to the committee, the committee chairs, Senator Hines and Representative Pignatelli, asking that portion of the bill be changed. Or that we as a town would like to be able to have that input. We would like to have that referendum. If it comes back that isn't, then we can maybe discuss this again on the 12th and obviously hear more from Chip. But I think that may be an appropriate response to what we're hearing, to what we're feeling, to what's going on right now.
So I think your motion, do I have a second for discussion purposes?
Steve, point of order, Lee made a motion earlier that was.
Yeah.
We didn't get a second on it.
Can I please amend?
No,
my
there's a motion on the floor.
Okay.
So do I have a second on the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, so what I was gonna say is, Kate, I think I was gonna suggest the same thing, that we authorize the town manager, which is what you're saying, to do some research, and if in fact we lose the local referendum, that we ask them to halt this and put that back in.
Yeah, I don't even know if halt is the
I don't
necessary
know what
word.
word, but-
That can be the recommendation of the committee. The committee can make the recommendation that section 128 that is being removed, to not remove it. So I think I think Mark, it will be able to use the appropriate language.
Yeah. So other discussion.
I'm not sure what it is, but we're voting to actually write this letter subject to Mark saying write it, or is it coming back to us?
Subject to Mark talking to the office or actually to Senator Hines and Representative Pignatelli and finding out if in fact local control is taken away.
Local control or referendum?
Referendum.
We've
We've been throwing that around all night, so that's a
Right.
problem.
Right.
Referendum is what the motion was.
I would to vote on it. Before I would, so all I knew about this was the two bills I got and this line in the agenda, and now I'm being asked to make a decision based on two bills that I'm not qualified to read and judge. A decision about whether this will be a local referendum or a vote. What do we have local referendums for versus what do we allow the select board to make decisions on? I just think it needs more than us right now authorizing the town manager to say, if it is, then we do it, if it isn't, we don't.
The interesting part of it.
I guess I have an objection to the process. If this comes to us like this, and we're supposed to make a decision with no advance, notice and no research.
The interesting part of all this is all during the discussion about this, whether in the papers or with it, whatever, we've never talked about anything but special permitting process. So, I don't disagree with you, Ed.
Yeah, I didn't know that we did need a referendum once.
And I don't think I disagree with you either, but we have a room, not completely full, but full of people that are saying that they would like to be able to weigh in on it, and we are potentially looking at a bill that maybe takes that away.
Okay, I don't know
but
who else
think-
saw the agenda, who knew that this is what we were discussing tonight, but there were 7 people in the room who
I
protected
understand.
out of 4,500
I understand what
voters.
you're saying, but I don't think there is anything wrong with us not asking them to hold it, just recognizing the fact that we as a community would like to be able to make that decision.
We don't know that we like that as a community. That's what I'm saying. We've given no thought to this, no deliberation. We haven't reached out to the community. We've heard from the 7 people who showed up. We don't make decisions like.
But that's my issue, is that this has
We
been
don't
going on
make
since
decisions like
January.
that.
Why haven't we had a discussion? Why didn't the people on the select board that have been talking to Suffolk Downs for the past 6 months inform the residents what's going on? Why was it kept to
It's
come
been in
out
the paper.
into, okay, it's been
Press
in the paper, but
releases were
that's.
written by lawyers.
But that,
and-
exactly,
David, please.
that's something that Suffolk Downs staged and wanted, invited the press to.
So Lee, the
hear
reason
that.
is,
So why was
none-
there
can I
an
finish?
opportunity?
None of this would have happened. If this doesn't pass, it doesn't affect Great Barrington at all. And as far as I understand, until you brought it up to me, Great Barrington still has all control over it if it passes. If it doesn't pass, there's no sense of us worrying about it because we're not having any racing here. They need this bill to pass in order to have any hope of racing here. Why are we gonna start to talk about something when legally they can't even have the racing here?
Don't the residents of Great Barrington get at least an opportunity to even know what the proposal has in store before it goes through the legislature? And it gets through to a public hearing that we should have been at the table, that we weren't even, notified of? I mean, the thing that flagged, is the big red flag to me, is that there was a public hearing that we should have been at the table, directly related to Great Barrington. So we weren't even aware that a public hearing, Suffolk Downs was represented, East Boston was represented. This is about Great Barrington. Our own senator is a co-sponsor on this bill. So who knew that this, so my problem, my concern is that it's gone through a process that I would like to, I'd like to amend my motion so that we just ask.
We already have
to
a
hold
motion
it.
on the
No,
table.
I'm just talking out loud, I'm not making a motion. But I would say, let's just, at least just say, let's hold it in committee till we can look into this. That's all I'm asking. It's not gonna, it looks like, you're more worried about them not getting, this race course in Great Barrington than having the town have the ability to
Who
weigh in
seems
on
more
this.
worried about that?
But no, I'm saying,
So
why
if-
are we not pausing it? What's the big fear? Why
Just
can't we
because-
just hold it?
Okay.
Why can't we hold it?
We have a motion, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Lee?
What?
We just voted, I didn't hear you.
Oh, no.
Okay. Do we have any other motions about this?
Am I
Yeah.
allowed to put another motion in?
Of course.
Okay. I move that an email accompanied by a letter from the town of Great Barrington be sent to both chairs of the Joint Committee on Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure before the close of business on July 24th, requesting that Bill S-101 be held in committee.
Do I have a second? Hearing no second, it fails. Okay. Citizen speak time.
I've got something else to say. I know, you're shocked. Steve Farina. And this is really kind of timely, I think, with what we just witnessed. A couple weeks ago, you guys, I briefly talked about the Lake Mansfield project. There was something that I forgot to mention, and I looked on my phone and I was like, oh yeah, there's that. In the town meeting, in the select board meeting, I'm sorry, not in the town meeting, in the select board meeting of about a month ago when the Lake Mansfield closure recommendation was made, there were several residents that were here who spoke before the select board.